Everybody. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Ad Podcast. Today, we have Helen Miall, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of VIOOH. As CMO of VIOOH, the leading premium digital out-of-home supply-side platform, Helen oversees marketing and GTM strategy for the platform. Helen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, no problem, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So before we get into a little bit of your history and your career, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what VIOOH is. We just talked a minute ago about the acronym VIOOH, what that stands for, and just give me a little bit of just a elevator pitch on the business.
Yes, of course. So VIOOH is stands for Viewed Impressions for Out of Home. Essentially, we are bringing programmatic advertising into the out of home space. Now, this technology has been in existence in digital display for 15 to 20 years. And in the last, it's come into the out of home world. So really transforming the way that out of home media is bought and sold.
I love that. And a lot of marketers are familiar with this statistic that outdoor advertising is 5% of marketing spend globally, but represents much, much more opportunity and inventory. So a huge component of the transformation of that industry, of course, digital screens being everywhere now, the ability to drive attribution through beacon and location monitoring inside of geofences and mobile devices. And as you mentioned, now having kind of standard media metrics in which to buy the audience and measure the audience. So excited to dive into that because I think digital out of home is a really exciting space. But before we do that, why don't we talk a little bit about your origin story and your career? I know you spent several years in the travel industry as a brand marketer at Air France and United Airlines, and then mainly since then on the platform and vendor side. But tell me a little bit about where you grew up, how'd you get into the industry, and tell me a little bit about your career.
No problem. Well, you might pick up from my accent. I'm not a US resident, but actually I wasn't even born in the UK either.
Oh, interesting.
So I was a bit of a global background. So travel was sort of my early passion. But I think that media and marketing were always there somewhere. I remember as a teen having a horrific floral wallpaper. So I used to rip out adverts from magazines and plaster my walls. So I was sort of surrounded by this world from very early on. And then at university got interested in marketing. And after sort of entering the travel industry through United Airlines and having an initial role in corporate sales, I quickly moved over to marketing and launched an online booking engine and haven't looked back.
That's awesome. And then when your early days of travel media, was it an exciting time to be in that space? Did you get to travel a lot as perks of the job, or how does that all work?
Yeah, I mean, you do travel, you can travel, and it is cheap, but you can also get stuck. You know, you're traveling standby. So if the flight is full, and if marketing has done its job well, then the flight is full and you can get stuck. But you know, it's I think when you are, you know, in your early 20s, it's a great lifestyle. And I definitely took advantage. I also have family who are in Australia, so you know, it helped me to get there more often than not, which was such a privilege. But yes, really interesting time. As I said, looking at everything from launching a booking engine when that first started. I'm showing my age here, but you know, doing that when it first started, and then moved into more of a different airline with Air France, and then moved into technology and sort of started more on the media side, working B2B there, with Microsoft.
Awesome. And how long were you at Microsoft?
So I was at Microsoft 4 years, you know, everything from promoting their in-game platform, in-game advertising platform, Messenger, all of that type of thing. And then as I was starting to look for a new role, there was actually programmatic advertising and digital display was just starting. And I saw this job at a company called Turn, which was one of the early DSPs and DMPs. and really launched their EMEA marketing. And at that time, programmatic was about 5% of display. It was really the new kid on the block. So there was a whole education cycle, learning, myth busting. It started off with remnant inventory and sort of moving away from that. And of course, now it's just everywhere. It's pretty ubiquitous. And, in addition, in excess of 95% in the most mature markets. So it's very much the norm. But it was a huge learning opportunity, really exciting to be in a new space. And I really wanted to make sure that even if I'm not a technologist from this perspective of I'm not an engineer, but actually being in that space where their innovation is happening and the change is happening, and being able to understand that, and as a marketer break down what can be some quite complex products and concepts into a really benefit-led storytelling. That was really exciting for me. So there was lots of learning, and I really had the most enjoyable time. And I think that really informed my future career, because, move on from a few roles, and I was approached about this role at VIOOH as CMO to really help VIOOH and the out-of-home channel in this automation and digital transformation, having done it in a different channel.
I love that. So it sounds like your most recent kind of notches on your resume have been focused on working with early stage ad tech solutions, where you're not just building brand awareness for your client, you're really building almost a category in a way, or building transformation of a category. So display advertising, as we know, was around for a long time, but it was very archaic. You had to go build relationships with individual publishers and build relationships directly. Like programmatic wasn't a thing, and it wasn't sold on an auction, and then you couldn't buy an audience. You had to just go place banners on any website that you could build a relationship with, either through a media agency or directly. And then programmatic came and automated and created market efficiencies for, the modern version of what you would come to know as display advertising.
Absolutely. And I've seen, the full cycle, as I said, starting my career client side at a brand or a couple of brands, and, being responsible for briefing in a media agency that had different teams for different channels. It's really nice to come into this world now, albeit on the other side, but seeing that omni-channel growth and how that's really started and been enabled by programmatic, as I said, originally in just a few channels, but now pretty much, across the board. And I think for marketers, that must be hugely exciting, and really being able to understand and stitch together all of the different elements of your campaign, of your media plan, and see how they interconnect and play with each other and impact each other.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's exciting. So let's talk about VIOOH, and let's talk about digital out of home. So, it's always interesting what's old is new. And, just like banners and internet advertising, around since the beginning of time, in the beginning, all static, I guess you would call it a print channel, back in the day when there were only 3 channels. There was motion picture, or there was moving images, which is TV mainly, but also film advertising. And then you had radio, which was, your ears. And then you had print, which was static images, which really could show up in newspapers and magazines, but also on billboards or bus stops, or, places that you would traditionally think of as out of home. So you talk a lot about VIOOH bringing the idea of programmatic to the outdoor industry. How are you doing that? Is it just through digital out of home, as far as screens now being available for insertion digitally and not having to go and change signs and do it the old-fashioned way? Or are there other things we should be thinking about when we talk about digital out of home?
So predominantly our work and the media owners that we work with are in the digital screen space, but there's a huge variety in that. I mean, that's everything from a billboard on Fifth Avenue to a bus shelter or newsstands in New York City, through to the gym environment, through to retail environments, office blocks, residential blocks. There's out of home is really this catch-all phrase, and there's so many different environments that it can include, within transport itself. And so I think that it's almost that, as an advertiser, there's going to be a screen that is right for you and your brand. It doesn't mean that every screen is right for you and your brand, but actually what programmatic is enabling is to really understand both the location, but also the context, and use those data triggers to make sure that your advertising and your message is really resonating. So, you can break it down now. It's so much more easily, you're just looking at day parting. So when is the specific time of day that my audience is going to be in front of this screen? And that audience can change through the day as well. The 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. commuter is different from the midday tourist who is walking past a billboard, right? And then also, what's going on in the environment that I should be, as a brand, I should be reacting to or resonating with. So, if I'm an ice cream brand, I only want to advertise when it's hot and sunny and people are, want to have an ice cream, and so if the summer has been awful and it's raining every day, let me save my ad dollars and, withhold that spend until the condition is right. So that's really where programmatic has enabled the out-of-home media to be much more relevant. And that's why you see there's growth in out-of-home. And it is driven by digital and it's driven by programmatic, because it's making it so much more efficient. And there are lots of studies that actually show that out-of-home is punching over and above its weight in terms of ad recall, effectiveness, and action taken after somebody is exposed to an ad.
Why do you think recall for outdoor is more impactful? I have my own reasons why. I think when we're looking at a computer and when we're looking at our phone, we kind of get ad fatigue, or we get desensitized because we're used to it. But when you're out in the world, even when you drive, you're a captive audience. You're meant to be focusing. I mean, there are self-driving cars and automation, and maybe that will start to change the recall and the awareness. But at least as it stands today, when I drive my pickup truck down the road to Los Angeles, I'm a captive audience, and I have to see and watch billboards. But also, in the real world, if I see a digital out-of-home display, like on a movie marquee, or on a podium in a shopping mall, or on the side of a bus, or on the top of an Uber, I think there's just something more impactful about seeing things in the real world versus on your screens. But have you guys done much research or have, measurement on how much more impactful, and why do you think that happens?
Yeah, there's a number of different research pieces. I mean, definitely the OAAA, which is the Out-of-Home Association of America. They've done a recent study which looked at this sort of trust and also the action taken. There's a number of different media owners who have done a lot of studies, but I think this comes down to 2 or 3 really key aspects. One is that it's a trusted environment. It is public facing. That screen is public facing. It is not a one-to-one medium. It is seen by multiple numbers of people at the same time. And so there is an inherent trust level that is in that. It's also much less likely to have sort of brand safety or fraud issues. So advertisers really understand and know that they're in a safe environment, and their ad is not going to appear, next to some content that they don't want to be associated with for whatever reason. There are, of course, restrictions, and they vary by country, around which ads you can place in which type of location. I know that in the UK, for instance, you can't put alcohol brands nearby religious places of worship, or schools, for instance, where you would have underage audiences. But those factors of it's trusted, it's visible, it's public, it's not skippable, it's brand safe, really resonate. And I think that, ultimately is why advertisers, it has existed for such a long time, and it's evolving, but it continues as with a really positive future.
So let's talk about the way that it's becoming programmatic, and where it's becoming more, I guess, adaptable into the traditional media metrics of a media plan. What is enabling that? Is it simply the ability to be able to know that you have an amount of ad inventory and you can rotate creative in at a frequency? Or is it also being able to understand the audience at different times of day, as you mentioned? And tell me more about the audience measurement piece. Is that done through geofencing? Is that done through some type of technology on the advert itself or on the billboard itself that scans for, I mean, when I'm driving my Tesla, I can see a lot of humans popping up on the screen through AI. So I'm imagining there's probably a whole different level of technology that's available to kind of measure crowds as they pass by or car traffic. But can you talk about some of the technology that provides that measurement and that quantification?
Of course. So in each country, there is a national body that will have done audience measurement. And they partner with the media owners who are, they manage the billboards or the screens, and they will then have a gauge of the type of audience, numbers, interest, that type of thing, but also how that varies by time of day of the week. There's also seasonality or special events that can impact how audiences are measured. And how many people are out on the street or in that specific location. And then one of the differences I would say with out of home versus digital display is that in digital display, one impression is seen by one person. You assume it's one person at the end of on your mobile or through the laptop screen, whatever it may be. In an out of home world, with that screen, it's seen by multiples. So there is something called an impression multiplier. But as I said, it's not the same calculation factor. It's not the same factor of multiplication at different times of day. That does vary. So there is more nuance, but that is why there is an industry body who is looking at those numbers and who is making those recommendations in terms of what that factor is, so that it's an unbiased factor, right? So I would say that is one way that you understand, okay, first of all, how many people have been potentially exposed to my advertising. Then what you can do is you can also use MAIDs, which stands for mobile device IDs. And you could set up a geofence around a specific screen. And bear in mind, it's not just looking at the longitude and latitude of that screen, but also actually which direction it's facing. Because if you take an airport environment, you might have a dual-sided screen that is seen by different groups of people at departure gates. So all of those little factors are taken into account, but you can set up this geofence. So you'll look at who has been exposed at the specific time, because all of these impressions that are served programmatically will have a specific timestamp. And you can say, okay, within that 1 hour period, because usually out of home is bought in hourly blocks, you could say who's been exposed, and then what did they do afterwards? So did they go online? Did they go into a store? And you can measure that through the mobile device ID. All of this is done in a GDPR or the privacy compliant way. So you're not actually identifying, okay, well, it's Helen who was at that store and exposed to that ad, but you can look at a group level and you can see, what percentage of people after being exposed to an ad went on and took another action. And we see really strong results, both in terms of either brand awareness, but also footfall, or going online and interacting with the online e-commerce store or whatever it may be. I mean, I think you just have to look at how many influencers quite like to take a picture of themselves if they ever appear on a billboard. There was a very famous instance of Emma Raducanu, who is one of the British tennis players, but in New York, she saw herself on a billboard. She took a selfie and shared that out to her followers. So you're not just getting the impact in out of home, but actually that multiplier effect in the omni-channel environment. So how is that out of home then driving people and to take action through other media, which maybe have more of that one-to-one metric?
Yeah, that's interesting. You brought up the idea that out of home can oftentimes be a catalyst for a social media campaign or like a reinforcer for a social media campaign. So,
Yeah.
it's funny when you think about social media content creators, their biggest aspiration is to appear on the big screen or be on TV or be in a film. But then, also appearing in a print campaign, or more importantly, an outdoor campaign where you're kind of larger than life, even if it's only for a second or a moment, just enough time to snap that selfie. I've seen a lot of, influencer marketing campaigns where a company will essentially buy a moment on a billboard just enough to get that selfie. And then then becomes like a social media activation, or the idea that you can, turn an outdoor, this is kind of more done in the traditional, out of home space. But I remember when we were at an influencer agency, we used to do things like create a rock wall out of a billboard and have creators climb it. And it was for like a automotive campaign that was important to, like outdoor enthusiasts and stuff like that. So do you see other ways that digital out of home is being leveraged as a way to pour gasoline on a social campaign, other than the kind of the selfie moment?
Yeah, I think there are a number of examples that we've seen, and it could be anything from, scan a QR code, or retweet this. There's one of our media owners who has taken tweets that have been shared about that brand and projected them onto the out of home screen in a programmatic way. So they're actually, again, it's essential, I think, really to think through all of the different touch points that you as a brand want to interact with your consumer, and how do they play together? Because there are ways when most commonly we see out of home at the start of the campaign and then amplification on other screens. But as that example shows, you can start a conversation or have a conversation on socials that then gets amplified onto the out of home. And it is that amplification and that impact of the big screen that you don't get, on your mobile. So I think that is a huge opportunity, and definitely one that brands are increasingly starting to really join the dots in their strategic thinking pre-campaign, and actually leverage in a much better
that's
way.
interesting. So the idea that digital out of home, the creative can be updated dynamically without the cost of repapering a billboard or repostering a wall. So you can kind of leverage during a campaign, if there is UGC or social media content being created in real time in conjunction with a social campaign, that content can quickly be reskinned and reformatted and piped into the digital out of home ecosystem, and then kind of create a feedback loop with things that you're seeing in social.
Definitely. So we did a study in 2024 called the VIOOH State of the Nation, and we looked at different countries around the world, the US being one, and we saw that 95% of respondents who were from the buy side, so either brand advertisers or in media agencies, were very interested in using dynamic creative in their campaigns. So that's definitely a huge opportunity. At the time, and this is, as I said, 12 months ago from now, only about 9% were actively using it. But we're just starting to do that research again. And I, for sure, can tell you that that number will have increased, because I alone have heard many more campaigns using dynamic creative in their content and in their creative. Because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to make it more relevant? It's almost a no-brainer. I think it's been in the digital display world for many years, but now coming into the out of home, and again, as I said, just making it much more relevant and resonate so much better for the brands.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned something about the kind of the call to action aspect. So there are moments when I'm driving down the street and I see an ad for something. This happens way more in digital. I feel like the ads are more relevant in digital, and maybe that's just, the advertisers are more sophisticated that are using digital. I feel they just resonate with me more often. But I'll see it for a second. I'll be like, oh, that's really interesting, but I'm driving. I can't do anything about it. And then there's the idea of, like you talked about, there's the tourist walking down the street or the commuter who's traveling by foot and they have their mobile device and they can, take a picture or scan a
Mhm.
QR code or jot something down to reference later. Is there a value in an audience that has the ability to take a call to action and do something versus kind of a captive audience that maybe is just driving by or going by a digital out of home ad that can't do anything? Do you guys ever think about it in that way, like propensity to actually do something, or respond to the creative?
Yeah, so I think, the way that I would think about that is that you have both, upper and lower funnel objectives generally as a brand. And not all types of creative are appropriate in every environment. To your point, brands will understand that if they put their advert on a roadside billboard, it's going to be very much about brand awareness. So think about what you're trying to achieve, and then the environments will be, will be appropriate for that objective. Whereas, yes, of course, the commuter who is walking on the street, or somebody in the gym who's looking for a break from their latest rep, will have more time to actually take a direct response. So what we're seeing very much is that brands are using programmatic out of home both for the upper funnel brand awareness piece, but then also for the much more action-driven performance level objectives. So it's really hitting both ends of the spectrum. Whereas I think in the traditional world, way back when, out of home was really only seen as an upper funnel media channel, but that has changed completely now, and it serves all.
That's interesting. So you've been referencing retail in a handful of our outtakes so far. Retail is essentially outdoor advertising that lives inside of a retail environment. Therefore,
Yes.
there are some, like within a mall, that might be owned and operated by the owner of the mall. But then when you get into the store level, now you're entering the domain of the brand, and those outdoor spaces are probably more controlled by the retailer, the leasee. How much does outdoor, from the retail perspective, also tie into retail media? Is there an overlap in buying that audience in a conglomerated way, or thinking about digital out of home as, like, how much do those channels overlap, and can they be purchased from one side or the other of the house, so to speak?
Yeah, so we're in active discussions with a number of different media owners who operate retail media environments. And the reason that is so interesting for our buyers is, as you quite rightly say, that ability to really hit consumers at the point of purchase in the right moment when they're in that buying time, mentality. And we have seen campaigns where you can advertise both on the way into the store and then actually when you're in the store. The opportunity, obviously, once you're within that store, is the ability to integrate first-party data, and whether that comes from the retailer, if they have a loyalty scheme or whatever it may be, they will know that you are, when you enter the store, because most likely you have, you're using your Wi-Fi or you're using your loyalty scheme data, right? You've got that. You're wanting to collect the points, and so you're then able to tie the exposure to the advertising directly into the purchases that have been made. Or you can also use that environment to launch, limited offers as well, to stimulate demand. So there are so many different opportunities, but it is hugely exciting because of the data play. And that's really why the retailers are starting to also, get into this space and make their assets available through programmatic networks such as and platforms such as VIOOH, because we have access to over 50 DSPs around the globe, which means anybody from anywhere can buy into that environment. And again, another opportunity, that another growth area, is really buyers coming from overseas who are looking at different environments. We've got a campaign which we're about to start for a Chinese brand. It was booked from China, but it's so, that's not a retail environment, but, we do have lots of interest. And as I said, because you've got in anywhere that you've got first party data and audience data, and you can really link that in, then that becomes very attractive to a brand.
Yeah, well, in the age of e-commerce, Chinese companies are going direct to consumer through their own e-com channels. So if they want to, they don't need to have an operation in America or a footprint in America. They can sell directly through e-commerce. So the ability to tap into
still need to drive
market.
the awareness, and that is where the out-of-home screens come into play.
Right. No, that's interesting. And also that element of trust, right? Like if you see a brand in digital, it's like, oh, anybody can buy a digital ad for $50. But if you see it in outdoor, it's like, okay, this is a real company.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I wanted to ask about sizing and versioning. So if digital screens are kind of ubiquitous now, you've got them in all shapes and sizes. It might be, something small in a retail environment that's above a product on a store shelf, up to a massive 3-dimensional surface in Times Square on the side of, a building in Las Vegas, like the Sphere. How does sizing and versioning of creative kind of scale across this ecosystem? And is AI kind of helping take campaign assets and then make them, translate them to the multitude of surfaces that are available through digital out-of-home?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. There are way more variations in sizes and also unique formats. Sides of buildings can be whole screens. And I think that causes complexity. And initially, that can be something that is somewhat of a barrier to activation for brands, because it's not just a standard, pixel size of a website banner or whatever it may be, but AI is the answer there. And it is really exponentially, making that such a possibility that you can easily get your campaign live onto these different formats. So yes, creative resizing, reformatting is a huge win and opportunity for AI to really help that scale.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's much faster and cheaper than any human could possibly do.
And also digital out of home lends itself to the ability to have motion. So, traditionally out of home was thought of as a static image or a real life banner asset, if you will. But then you had like Flash and all these things that turn banners into videos. Well, now with out of home, you can turn static surfaces into TV screens, not just billboards. When you talk about buying programmatically, do you think about impressions or video views, and do you delineate between static and moving imagery in these surfaces?
Yeah, so there are, as I mentioned earlier, some environments where moving imagery is not allowed, and that would be generally due to for a safety reason, like it is roadside. You don't want to distract drivers. But taking those aside, I think really, it's up to the brand. What are they trying to convey? Not every brand needs to have a digital moving image. And actually, we did a really interesting campaign for Santander, which is a banking and finance. It was a B2B banking as well, kind of like felt like it could be very static and stayed, I guess, in the brand. But actually, the creative that resonated the best was, wasn't moving. So I think it just depends on the brand, what the brand personality is. Not every brand needs to do all of that. That being said, there are brands that do and absolutely should lean into that. And I think one of the other exciting opportunities that is coming is that there's now technology that means you can turn any digital screen into what would look like a 3D campaign. So you don't need a special screen to be able to run a 3D campaign. You can actually run it on any digital screen with just some software and having the creative adapted in the right way. There are specialist companies. It's not every, we don't do this in-house. I would say that that's not our expertise. But just that ability to make something really pop out, that's how out of home can be so impactful.
Are you thinking about that idea of XR and VR and as wearable devices such as Meta Ray-Bans, or now, Meta has multiple manufacturers that they input their technology into from a wearables perspective. But will we be in a world at some point where everywhere we look is a screen because of XR and VR?
Oh, well, this would be my personal opinion as opposed to a professional opinion. I don't know. I think that I was listening to a Simon Sinek podcast actually at lunchtime today, and they were saying that in under 30s, because of the ubiquity of screens, happiness has really been impacted because people are finding that's like digital overwhelm. And yes, they still can enjoy the content, but they're not really getting fulfillment. And every now and again, it's nice to have a digital detox. So I'm not sure that, I would want to walk around with a VR screen, goggles on. But I think there is also a time and a place that you do see that those resonate. But for a lot of people, sometimes time away actually makes the advertising on the screen resonate in a much better way, which might sound like a bit of a conflict, I guess. But I think that because you can get overwhelmed, you can get digital overload for sure. So I think we'll wait and see. I think I'm not sold that we'll all be walking around with goggles on everywhere we go.
No, I think you're totally right. This idea of digital detox and analog and paperback books. I spoke to an agency leader last night who told me that her Generation Alpha daughter just ordered the print edition of Vogue. And print and magazines are making a comeback in the print format. So it is wild how things are cyclical, and we can't depend on ever digitalization of or the blending of the digital and the physical being something that people don't eventually have like a point of diminishing returns and yearn or want to take bigger stretches of time being offline to kind of calm their brains, right?
Yeah, I think it will be the one-to-one medium where you see that impact way more than the one-to-many, such as out-of-home screens, because I think it will be a very personal decision of me to put my phone down and not engage with it. So that, I think, will be where the impact is, as opposed to in the more public space.
Totally. Makes sense. So I quoted a 5% out-of-home spend being typical across the industry. This is based on a podcast that I did with the CEO of another out-of-home company a couple of years ago. But I wonder if things have changed. Has that number improved? Has it gone in a better direction? Wonder if you could just give me a state of the industry update on that percentage that I was quoted.
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. In real terms, in dollar terms, yes, the industry is growing. It's growing in the digital out-of-home space, and specifically driven by programmatic out-of-home. But overall, media has grown. So the pie itself is getting bigger. And I would say that where we are seeing the growth is that programmatic out-of-home is now much more integrated alongside digital plans. So it's much more often bought and planned by the general digital and programmatic team. And that's really a shift that we've seen, again, in our State of the Nation research over the last few years, is that the buying responsibility has moved out of the out-of-home specialists, or is still moving. It's not in every case, but is continuing to move into the digital and programmatic teams. And I think when that movement has completed, that's when you'll really start to see a greater percentage over and above the 5%. I would say it's growing, but everything is growing at the moment. So yes, we're seeing growth, absolutely, year on year, but the overall pie is growing. But there's a huge opportunity, and because what we're now able to do is much more easily put together the impact that the out of home is having on the remaining channels, you can see that it's actually punching above its weight. And so what we predict will happen will be there will be some redistribution of digital budgets into out of home.
Yeah, that's interesting. So as it becomes more uniform and more available programmatically, it will simply be an optimization conversation, because the optimization bots will see this is working, this is more effective, and the dollars will naturally shift there.
Yeah, and I think that there is also the ability and the opportunity for mixed media modeling, where you're able to look at that attribution in a much truer sense. I think if you remember, people have moved away from last click attribution. They understand that it's quite so simple as that. And I think that with out of home becoming more programmatic, and being able to look at that from a data-driven perspective, you can use that data-driven decision-making to really understand what is the optimum mix of media that I should be using in my campaign. And it won't be the same for every brand. It'll depend on their objectives. But I really feel that now that's the sort of next big evolution, is much more widespread mixed media modeling.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. All right, let's listen for the industry at large, but let's talk a little bit more about your role at CMO at VIOOH. So as the person leading the brand and leading the go-to-market acquisition strategy, how are you most active, and what do you guys do to find customers?
Sure. So we have a sort of dual objective, I would say. Yes, of course, it's thought leadership, growing the overall pie, really advocating for programmatic out of home. And as I mentioned, digital out of home is growing as a percentage of the media, and programmatic is really driving that. But there's always new audiences, I would say, both on the buy side and the sell side. So we need to educate them. We need to give them the information that instills confidence and drives adoption, both for buyers and for sellers, because it's not just out of home media owners who are now changing the way that they're selling and making their inventory available, but it's not only, and it's out of home buyers, but also these digital buyers who are learning about out of home and the nuances in this market. That being said, of course, we have a financial bottom line that we need to look at, and Q2 and Q4 are really the sort of key sales opportunities, or the key revenue quarters for out of home. So, we will very much, in terms of my marketing team and the activity we do, align with that in terms of industry events or sales packages or whatever it may be.
Yeah, interesting. So a big part of the channel for you is kind of, the conferences and things like Cannes, where you and I connected originally, getting out there for thought leadership and kind of evangelizing the category itself, but also spending time with clients at key events and industry, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
And it's important for us to be not just talking to the out of home world, because the growth is coming from this alignment with the broader marketing activity, with your digital strategy. So, that's really important for us to be in those bigger conversations.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. So what would you say is the biggest misconception around programmatic out of home? What is the biggest hurdle that people who aren't utilizing it to the full benefit of their brand needs to get past?
I think one being that you should measure out of home in the same way as programmatic display, and that all impressions are created equal. So, let's just face it, you can't click a billboard, and one impression on a billboard doesn't mean that it's just being seen by one person. It's being seen by multiple. So there are some key differences with with programmatic display. But we have a lot of resources on the VIOOH.com website and our YouTube channel where we explain all of these differences, how measurement can be done through mobile device ID exposure, the factors influencing the impression multiplier, as we talked about earlier, all of those things. So please, avail yourself of those assets because we're here to help and we're here to answer those questions.
I love it. What do you predict is going to be the next big innovation in digital out of home?
So I touched on it earlier, the dynamic creative adoption. And as I said, in our research last year, we found that 95% were in favor, but there was only a 9% actually using dynamic creative in their programmatic out of home. So anecdotally, I know this has already increased this year. We will have the research behind that to prove it as well. But it's becoming just so much more widespread because it gives that increased relevance, contextualization, and improves creativity.
Yeah, I love that. All right. This has been exciting, Helen. Really, I'm always fascinated around out of home in general, and especially digital out of home, especially as you see these more impactful, interesting places and use cases from a targeting perspective, a creative perspective, and just having that, more impactful channel. I think kind of just, you talk about the blue car effect. A lot of people are like, you see an ad on digital or you see an ad on TV, but then when you see it in two channels, then you're like, oh my gosh, this brand is everywhere. This campaign is everywhere. And I feel like that mainly happens when you see something in out of home and in another channel. But I've really enjoyed our conversation. You mentioned some resources that marketers can take advantage of, but is there anywhere else you would like to point the audience to learn more or connect with you directly?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, VIOOH.com, which is spelled VIOOH.com, is our website, or you can find me on LinkedIn, just / Helen Miall, MIALL, and happy to answer any questions.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Helen, for joining me later in the afternoon across the pond. Really appreciate your time today. And for those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow, subscribe, tune into more with other marketing leaders as we continue to roll out. If you give us a honest review, that's how we find a larger audience organically. And more importantly, if there's a marketer out there in your life that you think needs to learn more about how out of home is changing and how they can leverage it, or somebody in agency land who you think might enjoy the conversation that I had with Helen today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Helen, we'll let you end your day. Appreciate your time. Appreciate the time you give us today.